Hello and welcome again to the National Land Realty Podcast. This is episode number 96. In case you can't read for these intros, I'm totally reading a script. There's a lot of information and you're going to watch my eyes do this thing. I just feel like I need to mention that because I feel weird when I see myself on screen and I can see my eyes doing this. I write it down because it's a lot. There's a lot of information. Okay, so welcome to episode number 96 of the National Land Realty Podcast, where we discuss all things land. Our goal here is to inform, educate, and entertain those of you who own land or are interested in the buying and selling of land throughout the United States. My name is Mac Christian, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at National Land Realty. I'll be your host for this episode. Now, a while back, I did a podcast on solar land development and how to lease your land for solar energy. I spoke with National Land Realty managing broker, Wayne Dunson out of Texas. Wayne expressed a desire several times during that podcast. He wanted to know what happens on the other side of the table when, say, a landowner working with, we're going to say, an attorney or a real estate agent or somebody puts their land up for an option to get developed for solar energy development. Now, that question's always been pretty vague. You submit it and it goes off to the company and you hear back, upwards of 2 years later about what their decision is. It's a long process. Now, that ambiguity is now fixed. Today, I have answers to the question. Now, today, the episode today, as I stutter my way through that, today I'm talking to Vincent Caruso. Vincent is managing director at Percheron LLC. Percheron LLC helps to develop, and this is why the writing down of everything is really great. He helps to develop, or the Percheron LLC helps to develop electrical transmission, utilities, oil, gas, wind, solar, highway, rail, land surveying, environmental, title research, and acquisitions. In other words, Vincent Caruso is the other side of the table. Vincent listened to our podcast on solar development with Wayne Dunson, and he reached out to me because he feels like this information is something that we should all know about. After talking to Vincent, I agree with him wholeheartedly. This is information that you should know about. And special thank you to Vincent. I can't express enough how much I enjoyed this conversation. This is just a good human. This is a very well-informed human. Obviously, he, managing director of the company. But besides that, this is somebody who works to help people, and I think that that's rare. So this really was a neat conversation. I hope you listen to this and get as much out of it as I did. Now, sit back and enjoy. All right, so I am sitting here with Vincent Caruso, and we've been kind of coordinating for a little bit. You just went through a knee surgery, so we're grateful to have you here. And you work with Percheron LLC, and I'm going to let you tell everybody about it because I have what I've researched and everything, but I won't be nearly as good at explaining it as you are. But tell me a little bit about your background and sort of what you do with Percheron.
Sure. And yes, I did just get through a knee surgery. We couldn't have done this. Well, we could have done this 2 weeks ago, but it would have been a far different interview when I was coming off of that. My name is Vin Caruso. I'm a managing director with Percheron. Percheron is about a 35-year-old company that works nationwide in the lower 48. We acquire, manage, identify land for various end users, whether it's oil and gas, renewables, electric transmission lines, pipelines, ports. We have a lot of clients and industries that we serve. We also add value additive services such as survey, engineering, layout and design, environmental. Really, the reason that I was here today is first, you were kind enough to invite me, and I just wanted to say thank you for that invite. And also because I've listened to this podcast on actually a lot of your episodes now, and several of the ones that you've done in the past on renewable energy acquisitions or solar leases. I thought they were great conversations, and I wish that I had been a part of them. And I contacted you, and I wanted to see if we could further some of those discussions.
Yeah, and some of the so to refer anybody listening to the episodes that he's regarding, we did a couple with Wayne Dunson out of West Texas, who specializes in a lot of solar leasing. and the conversations that we had were from the land acquisition side of working with landowners towards a solar lease, which is something that our company facilitates and that Wayne does a lot of. And the question that Wayne kept on asking during those conversations was, man, I wonder what the developer's thinking. Well, I wonder what, whoever's coordinating the transaction, it takes a long time. What are they doing behind the scenes? Like, you never really know from working with the landowner standpoint. And Vince here was kind enough to reach out and basically said, well, I've got that answer. And so we're here to kind of review a little bit of that today. And so how did you get into Percheron? What's sort of your background in this field?
Uh, a lifetime ago, I was a maritime attorney, and we wound up moving to Houston, Texas, my wife and I, and when in Rome. And I started working for a company called OGM, and they were strictly in the oil and gas side of things. But through a series of mergers, we first went national and then also started expanding the footprint of the number of industries that we served. And about 5, 6 years ago, a colleague, partner, and very good friend of mine decided to see what else we might be able to use some of our skill sets for. And we realized that we were ideally positioned to move into the world of renewables, wind, solar, battery storage. And so we started, I guess, designing and then fleshing out a service line there.
Gotcha. And so your current role with Percheron, just fill us in a little bit of sort of what you manage right now from your side of things, so
Sure.
that we have a little bit of graph, because like you're not in the engineering side, but like, so tell us a little bit about what you do so that we have a little context.
Of course. I am the managing director of the renewable energy group at Percheron. And so we will work with developers, whether those developers are large international renewable energy firms, whether they are private equity backed groups, whether they are startups. But anyone who's looking to create a wind project, a solar project of any scale or size, not rooftops. So we're talking about on property located somewhere, usually in rural areas, or battery storage solutions. We will handle the land identification, acquisition, and management portion of their project. The reach outs, we will be working with the landowners and the county engineers, the county boards of supervisors, whatever it takes to actually bring a tract of land into the project. And then I will also be coordinating, because again, like I said, we have a suite of services at Percheron that allows us to. The goal was, from a land point of view, to help a client bring a project, bring a tract of land, not only into a project, but up to construction. And then we do have some services that follow beyond that. So whether I'm liaisoning with our engineers who are going to be either helping lay out or laying out whatever it is we're going to build, or the environmental assessments that have to go into the project, whether it's the alter and boundary surveys. We have an in-house survey group, the GIS group that works with our UAV group that actually allows us to produce high resolution topographic maps that are needed throughout the process. So we really have tried to put together a soup to nuts full service package for a developer that wants to put on the ground, whether it's community scale, DG, which is distributed generation, or a full utility scale wind, solar, or battery project. And then also whatever connectivity they need to get to and from the grid.
So when it comes down to acquiring land for a development, are you the one interacting with the landowner that could be leasing the property, or and again, this could be an investment group that owns the land, it could be a private owner that owns the land, however that works. But is your company engaging in the direct conversation, or are you working through the company that is engaging in the direct conversation?
They bring us on, they outsource that duty to us. And so we will be the one actually negotiating with, whether it's the mom and the pop at the kitchen table, whether it's an investment group, whether it's a large sophisticated landowner that you have to pass through all of their hurdles of consultants and accountants and lawyers and whoever else they have. But we are the actual point of contact with the landowner.
So you are exactly the other side of the table of the conversations that we've had previously.
Yes.
No, that's perfect. And I wanted to kind of lay that out so that people understood that, like, the sort of full circle of the conversation. So I want to jump in a little bit. And again, I just want to outline this before we sort of jump into the conversation. I have like two syllabuses here that like you sent me one and I had an agent send me one. These are not questions that I can field. So this is out of my depth. I'm gonna do my best to thread the needle here. But tell me, what kind of different types of renewable energy development are there that you work with, and sort of kind of outline a high level what those are and how you engage with those.
Sure. From a global view, you're looking at onshore, and I'm only talking about onshore. What we do offshore, that's an entire different ball of wax, but that's not what we're going to be interested in today anyway. When you're onshore, actually talking about tracts of land, again, not talking about rooftop solar, whether it's residential or commercial. We're talking about what's going to actually be put in or on the ground, usually on large tracts of land, usually outside the suburban ring of a city. The two main types are wind or solar. There will be battery storage that goes along with that. Unfortunately, when I think this was started and really started to ramp up 15, 20 years ago, the battery storage portion was not an immediate part of the solution, and that should have been. And the problem is they're having to go back retroactively now and start adding those as quickly as they can. But when you look at a new project, the battery storage component is going to be a part of that project. But right now, from a binary point of view, you're looking at, is it a wind project or is it a solar project? And then once you have that answer, you're asking yourself, okay, what scale is the project? Are we talking about something that's going to take 20 to 30 acres and it's going to be more of a community scale? Or are we talking about something that's going to be a utility scale that might be 100, 200, 300 megawatts of power generation, which could require anywhere between 2,000 and 4,500 acres for a solar farm, and then a wind farm can be up from there. So it's and how you go about each of those projects, both at the greenfielding or the initial stage, and then how you get them to construction and generation, are, while there are similarities, there's also vast differences between those.
And you just used the term that I want to clarify. You said greenfielding, and is that sort of the vetting process? Is that the name that you use for that, or if you could explain that a little bit?
Sure, not a problem. You Greenfielding is viewed by developers as you're going out to a tract of land that, from sovereignty, which is the point that the state or the federal government gave it out for the first time from the government to a landowner, it has historically been vacant, which is rare, but more often than not, something agricultural. Okay. And for the first time, we are going to be bringing it into some type of generative or industrial use. And because it's that first time, that's greenfielding. Theoretically, anything after that should be brownfielding, and that has an entirely different set of requirements, because you're coming up after something. But let's just stick with greenfielding for a moment, because I think what would likely be of most interest to the listeners of this podcast is, how do you go from that farm tract, that ranch tract, that pasture land? How do you go from that to all of a sudden being an array of solar panels or a wind turbine? And so greenfielding is that initial first step. And one of the really interesting points that you kept coming back to on some of your previous podcast episodes on this topic were, what are the odds of one of these projects being successful? And what's interesting is that's a changing number. Okay, so depending on a lot of variables, but for right now, let's just take it down to, depending on where you are in the process of that project, okay, that number is going to change. So when you're in the greenfielding stage, the batting average is horrifically, horribly, terminally low. Okay, it is, it's bad. You're looking at somewhere between 10 and 25% of
Did it actually convert to end stage product?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Now, the further you go through the option period, the further you go through the workup period, the closer you get to making those decisions of, is this going to go operational? That success percentage starts to go way up, because it has to, because you have more on the line. You spent more time, more resources. You've got more funding. You also have more certainty, and so it's difficult to say, hey, what is a good success ratio or a good success percentage for the industry. It really is dependent on where you are in that continuum. And when you're in the greenfielding stage, and I'm going to say this, but then I'm going to backtrack and try and explain it a little bit better. The greenfielding stage, by many, is a throw a net overboard and see what you can get in the boat. Okay. And more often than not, there's the cast a wide net point of view. I do everything I can to narrow that. Okay. Because I think as an industry, with responsibility to landowners, with responsibility to investors, I think the more work that we can do before we go into the field, before we talk to landowners, I think we can actually drive that initial success percentage up. But as of right now, with the way that things are typically done, it's cast a wide net and see what you can do. I don't believe that's necessarily the best way to go about you. I don't believe that's necessarily the best way to go about a greenfielding process.
So I want to ask you sort of, the what types of property and go into like what's the minimum property size and stuff like that. But before that, I want to ask, exactly, if it's low odds out of the gate, and that's, I would, it's still better odds than email marketing from getting somebody into a funnel for me. So from my side of things, my conversation, you're still looking at great odds, but what you're talking about too is from the landowner's perspective of like, well, I went into this, why not? And so I guess that would be the question is what is the evaluation that is going on in that first stage that makes it low odds, and sort of what's being looked at behind the scenes there?
Everything is being looked at. That's the problem. Realize tracks are identified right now, and I'm oversimplifying this, okay? But in
Which
a
is
general
perfect,
sense,
because I think very simply.
so, and with an oversimplification, tracks are identified by computer algorithm for the most part. When you start a mineral project, an oil and gas project, a hard mineral project, a reservoir engineer or a geologist walks up to a map, points at a place on the map and says, I have to be here. The project has to be here. If we can't be here, there is no project. And so you fight tooth and nail to get there. That has a lot of limitations on those sorts of projects. When you're talking about a project like this, what you're looking for is a tract of land that is suitable within certain parameters based on the project that you're running. And we'll get to those parameters in a second, but for right now, all you have to know is that we just have to meet those parameters. That opens up a wide number of tracks compared to the more restrictive, I have to be here. And so when you're in that initial greenfielding process, it's almost an embarrassment of options. Okay. And that causes its own problems. Imagine going home tonight and deciding and asking, hey, what do you want to have for dinner? We can eat anywhere. It's going to be a 2-hour conversation as opposed to, I want to go eat at this restaurant. So the issue initially with greenfielding is when you're first going out, before you sign any contracts whatsoever, you're looking at a tract of land that has been identified by a computer program, by a GIS computer program, that is a certain distance away from a substation or a interconnection point where they can do a line tap on an existing transmission line. It's going to have certain slope parameters, because you can't, just because of the physical nature of solar panels or wind turbines, you can't have more than, let's say, an 8% grade. Okay. Is it in a floodplain? Is it covered in trees? Because they don't want to have to be cutting down trees in order to put solar panels. That is somewhat problematic. So all of these can be done remotely before a landowner is ever even talked to. So by the time that the landowner is identified, they have a tract of land that theoretically can be used in a project. And so once you get to that stage, I think the problem that we have as an industry is, I didn't just identify that tract of land. 15 other companies identified that tract of land. And so the major problem in the initial greenfielding stage is, I could be one of 3, one of 6, one of 7, one of 10 people who are talking to you about your tract of land. And we start to have some issues with landowner fatigue, landowner confusion. I know in some of the past interviews I've listened to, there's a lot of questions on the landowner's part in terms of, hey, why are we started this process. Why is there a hold on this process? It's what happens when you're looking at 40 tracks, 50 tracks, 100 tracks of land, trying to find 10 tracks of land.
Yeah, so you have to, so the evaluation process comes, it's sort of like a job interview, right? Like, you
Hmm?
go in and then there's that gap in communication, and it's going to be exaggerated, right? Like, this isn't a job interview, this is land, and you're going through a lot of logistics. But it's one where, behind the scenes, you're not the only candidate. And all
Yes.
of the properties are being evaluated, and that takes a little bit of time, if I'm hearing you right.
Yes. And in a perfect world, I think people can be upfront and honest about that. And I think these processes tend to go best when everyone is communicating well. When don't get the landowner's hopes up. Okay, you're going to be putting some decent numbers in front of them. Don't make them feel as though, hey, you know what? You are the only person I'm talking to. And if you sign this, this is going to be done today. It's not going to be like that. And so I think if there's honesty up front with the landowner, and I think reasonable expectations are set, I think you'll have a far better outcome, because this is going to be a process. This is going to be a multi-year process, and we'll touch on those reasons in a little bit. But I think in order to survive that multi-year process, both as a developer and as a landowner, I think you have to know what you're getting into up front. And usually the most successful efforts that I've been a part of have had those conversations up front.
And you spoke to the fact that competitive industry, several competitive companies in the same industry will be going after the same landowners. Does it end up in a bidding war where sort of some of those unrealistic promises are made just to lock them down so you have them in the funnel?
It can. And that's where I think it's incumbent upon a developer to be honest. I think, and we're going to simplify this because right now we're assuming that it's only companies in your own industry and field that are going after that tract of land, because all of those companies will have more or less the same project economics, and so you'll know what they can and cannot offer within reason. But when you have out of industry competition for that same tract of land, that you could be off to the races with someone you just can't compete with. Think Amazon wanting to put a warehouse on a tract of land. You're not going to win. But no, in general, my suggestion and my very firm suggestion to the developers that we work with is you have to know your project economics upfront, because you have to know what you can offer, because you want to make a good, fair offer going in so that you establish credibility immediately. But at the same time, if you get into one of those bidding wars, you have to be able to know when to pull the ejection lever, because some of these will start to run away. And that is partially because at this stage, there is such a land rush going on. There is so much money in this field. There are very few bad actors. They're out there. There are very few bad actors. But what you do have is you have competition and the need to show success at certain points. And so you may be up against a company that is willing to go above a reasonable offer, because in that area, their investors, their bank, their corporate management have said you are going to have success in this area. And so now you, as a well operating, well thought out developer, is now competing with someone who's willing to go above you. Maybe just in that one place, but you're going to wind up dealing with that. And I think you have to be ready and willing to say, okay, you know what? Everything about this tract of land was perfect except for the price. I'm stepping back. And I think it's the polite and fair thing to do, to let the landowner know that you're stepping back and why you're stepping back. But yes, I have seen numerous bidding wars. I have seen them reach ridiculous levels. To be honest, I don't have very many success stories when that happens.
I was going to say it's almost like it comes across almost like a Bollinger Band scenario where like you've got your high and your low caps and you just got to work within those. And as soon as you're outside, and I bring up Bollinger Bands because it's like an automatic sell, right? Like that's like, nope, we're out. And
Yep.
it's only when you get outside of those constraints that it's like you get hammered or something
Yes.
goes wrong.
Yes.
And because people get in the way, egos get in the way, stubbornness gets, all those things play. The human factor
It's
comes
very
into
personal.
play.
Yep.
And yeah, but as far as communicating with the landowner, and then the dynamic for the landowner, I mean, what you're presenting here is, you know, you have several companies going in trying to acquire the land, and you could end up in a bidding war. Like, hey, I'll give you a pony, I'll give you, this much money. You also get, a free cup of coffee every day. I'm of course pulling all that out of my pocket, right?
Yep.
But there's all these promises getting made, and it's from the landowner's side, it's two-sided, right? You have that. You also have, in the case where we're talking where, a real estate professional is representing them in the transaction, you could also end up with that on that side as well, where, the first things that are happening is, landowners going out to find representation for a negotiation like this. And it's like, well, what's your commission? What's your split? How much time are you going to dedicate? And you end up with professionals on both sides that, unless you find the right actors to work with, you could get unrealistic promises. So from a landowner's perspective, you really got to do your diligence on something like this. Definitely get representation. Definitely find the right fit for you that's transparent and honest, because you take multiple levels where promises could be made. You want to make sure that those don't get exacerbated as you kind of go through the process. And that's just like, as you're talking, I'm seeing the field, from an outside perspective, like, okay, yeah, that's a lot of people vying for one piece of land. And it kind of buys into what you're talking about too, is definitely a land rush scenario where a lot of companies are kind of going in and looking at this kind of stuff.
Yes. And I think I think that you're bringing up some very good points that we should touch on. I try, and everyone who I work with tries to come off as fair, honest, trustworthy, and competent. And we really, really appreciate it when the person on the other side of the negotiation is the same. Not just the landowner, but whatever assistance they have as well, whether it's a consultant, a manager, accountant, lawyer, whatever. It makes these things go much smoother, and it radically increases the likelihood that that will be the successful deal. But I mean, that's like everything else in life. If you get a bunch of well-meaning good actors all aiming toward the same goal, you're going to increase your percentage success rate. And, I think the initial stages, those initial negotiations, should be determining whether the opposite party is trustworthy, whether they're competent, whether they can live up to their promises. Because if the answer to those are no, you need to get out as fast as possible. And we do the same. We will meet some people who, whether it's the landowner themselves or whether it's one of their representatives, they are asking for, the earth, the moon, the stars, and it's not going to happen. There's no purpose. If you can't talk them back from that ledge, there's no purpose in being in that acquisition process. So if you're looking at a significant transaction here, even the smaller ones are significant. You're looking at either a long-term lease or you're looking at an outright purchase, and the person who currently owns the land no longer owning the land. Those are major emotional and financial decisions. And I think it's necessary up front to, I'm not saying to become best friends. I'm not saying to, marry into the family, but I'm saying take the time to make sure this is the group you want to work with.
I think that's valuable information across the board, like, because what your company is looking at going in is this easy to work with? And let's say the landowner has somebody that's, you're like, oh yeah, I'm all set up. I got a pit bull on my side. Like, that's not necessarily what you want, because like I'll put it into language that I know, like coming from an advertising background and an agency background, and I'll keep the language clean. But we had what we called an a-hole tax, right? And it was like, if the client is difficult, sorry, you're getting charged more because you're difficult. You take more time, you take more resources. We have to charge you more. Now, if you're on the side of, let's say, Vince, your side of things, it's not a tax. It's just outright, we won't work with you, if I'm hearing you right, unless the land is amazing.
Yeah. And the problem here is on the renewable side of things, usually the land is, even amazing land, there's probably an amazing tract of land 2 miles away.
Exactly that. Like, there's other people there.
And that tax absolutely exists going in both directions. So it's something we do look at, and you should, if you're one of the ones that's competent and trustworthy and intelligent, you should have the right to pick who you work with in life. So trust me, we monitor that as well. But no, these are complicated deals. You're potentially talking about crafting a deal that's going to last 40, 50, maybe even 60 years. By the time you throw in option periods, construction periods, the different generation periods, the options to extend those generation periods, you're looking at 2 generations in the future. Okay, you're trying to craft a document today that your grandchildren, if assuming it's a lease, that your grandchildren are going to be benefiting from or suffering under. Okay, you need to have everyone operating reasonably and professionally if you have any chance of actually getting through that. Because the only alternative to that is you either get someone by surprise or you get them under duress, some type of financial duress. And those two categories are one, they're unicorns. They're not good unicorns either. So you shouldn't plan for them or hope for them. And they never work out anyway. So really what you're looking for are, you're looking for a competent counterparty. And then no, so having a pit bull or a bulldog coming at you the whole time, you're probably just going to have us start looking somewhere else. Now, on the other side, let's look at the positive rather than the negative. When you have someone who has a good personality, they're trustworthy, they're able to communicate and will actually return phone calls. You have someone who's willing to work with you toward a solution. We absolutely start stopping to look at the other groups that we're talking to, and we're starting to focus in on you. So again, when you say what's the odds of success in any given project, you absolutely can raise the odds of your own successful outcome.
Which is a really unique perspective, because like in any of the conversations that I've had about solar development, that part of the conversation doesn't come into play, because from a lot of the times, from the landowner perspective, from the agent perspective, and like you said, it could be an attorney, it could be an accountant, it could be whatever representation you have. They're looking at it like, well, come on, man, we got the land right here. Check this out. But there's also that human factor of how easy are you to work with? What kind of communications have you had? Are you communicative when you're going through the process? But I want to, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, what were you going to say?
One of the reasons that I think we've been as successful as we have is because all of the negotiators that work with me are all large landowners themselves. So while they may be talking to you about putting a solar farm on your land, when they go home, they've got cattle problems, they've got horse problems, they're trying to figure out what they're going to plant, when, everything that person that they're negotiating with, their life, they have the same life. Okay. And so it allows them to talk the same language. It also allows them, I think, to behave appropriately. And I think it really is it kind of puts the relationship on a fast track, because you're dealing with someone who gets you, and that's and who is going to treat you correctly. But that's so essential.
I mean, I kudos to you on that account, because I mean, a lot of the time what you have is like, you have the suits coming in, and if you bring the suits in to talk to a rural landowner, like, one, the red flag goes up immediately, because anytime you go rural, you're working with an extremely protective audience. Like that's what I speak readily to all the time, is that, like, because in rural communities you have had suits come in and put people in the bad agreement, so people are leery, and just in general, you ain't from here, so it's like, it's that whole the scenario. So yeah, that matters when the communication starts.
I'm laughing because I recently flew up to a rural county in Iowa to address the Board of Supervisors. And because I had something I had to go to before that, I showed up in dress slacks, nice pair of shoes, windbreaker, and the county engineer came down to get me and bring me up to the Board of Supervisors. He looked at me in the middle in this sea of blue jeans and jackets and boots, and, "You must be Vin. You're here to visit us, right?" And then just brought me up. But it was across the lobby of that courthouse. He knew I was the one that was out of place, and I never do that. Typically, I'm in jeans, I'm in boots. But you are so incredibly right, and they will know when you're not one of them, and you automatically get that iron curtain coming down on you, where it's standoffish from day one.
I had that in this job, and I come from a mountain town, and it's like, logging community, and that's just like, that's my background. And I got into this job, and it's it's a position of it's a C-suite level position, and you're one of the higher up managers, and we were going to the national convention. I'm like, okay, I got to do the thing, right? Like, I got to dress up, and our COO looks at me and she's like, "You can't wear that." I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, "They are not gonna roll with you." Like, she's like, do you own jeans or boots or anything? Like, well, yeah, that's what I always wear. I wanted to dress to impress, and no, don't do that. And it went against what I thought on formalities. So I went against formalities and just dressed normal.
I think what it comes down to is, be who you are and represent yourself accurately and honestly.
Mhm.
It doesn't you also have to realize land is an exceptionally complex concept. When I was in law school, they kind of throw property law in the first year and just want to get through it as fast as possible to get to the fun stuff. But when you actually go back and you start to look at it and you realize that our concept of land and the legality behind land has been evolving for 800 years since, medieval Britain. And you realize all of these systems that we've set up to understand and convey and use land, they're very, very old. And when you realize that people who tend to live in the rural areas have a different understanding of land than people who live in the city or in the suburbs. To someone in the city or the suburbs, it's where you put your house. Okay. And that's really the only connection that you have. Whereas there's no profit to be made from the land. It's something where you physically occupy. Whereas when you start to look at the rural concept of land, you're starting to see that it's an intrinsic part of your being. Okay, it's not just where you live, but it's where you work. It's where you derive your income. It's maybe where you have federal subsidy programs. It's what you're leveraging to get loans at a bank. It is the core of everything that you are. And so it becomes very problematic, not just, the outward symptoms are, you're wearing Italian loafers and wearing a suit. And that's the outward sign that you're different. But it's the conceptual difference. It's to one person, it's attractive land. I buy a house here, I buy a house there, I don't care. Talking to someone who is fifth generation, they can tell you every nook and cranny, up and down, every tree. They know everything about that tract of land. And it's really two different worlds trying to come together.
That was a beautiful poetic breakdown. Like I have never heard it put that way. And I'm stealing it. Sorry, it's mine now. We're talking about that part of the equation, so I want to throw at you. What we're talking about the landowners. What makes a tract of land ideal for what you do for renewable energy? And you spoke to grade, and so the other questions would be size, location, that kind of thing.
Yep. There's a lot. Now let's narrow our parameters down, because what I need is going to be dependent on what I'm trying to do. So let's just, for this conversation, say that I want a utility scale solar project. Okay. Now that means that I'm going to need as much acreage as I can get, and I'm going to use as much acreage as I can get. So when I look at a tract of land for a utility scale solar project, larger is better than smaller. More regular in shape is probably better than a very odd shape that's going to have, maybe follows a river or has odd contours. The largest rectangle you can find me is the best thing that you can do. They cannot, because you can't have one solar panel. They have generation analyses to determine how much power will be produced per solar panel. And that's, generation equals money. So you can't stack these things where one is over the other and is going to cast a shadow, because you just reduce the efficiency of that lower one. So they have maximum gradient allowances, where if you're over 8%, you're not going to be able to put solar panel arrays, at least not on that portion of land. So one of the major reviews that we do of a tract of land is a usable versus non-usable acreage calculation, where yes, you may have a 500-acre tract of land, but 200 acres of that may be riverbed covered in trees and at a 15% grade, which is absolutely beautiful for hunting and fishing, but I can't put a solar panel on it. And so, now all of a sudden, yes, I'm contracting for your 500 acres, but I may only be able to use 300 of those acres. Again, trees and coverage, that is a big deal. Not because we as an industry can't cut down trees physically, but when you look at ESG requirements, when you look at the persona of the industry and what they're trying to accomplish, and in terms of green energy, the first thing going through with bulldozers and chainsaws is not what they're looking for. So and also distance to point of interconnection. Is the substation literally on the other side of the property line, or are you having to stretch miles to get to wherever it is that you're going? Because realize it's the same problem they've had with electricity since Edison put together some of the first generating plants, Edison and Westinghouse, 140 years ago. The further you put electricity out on a line, you have transmission loss. So that's why you can't stretch something 20 miles. Okay, because if you were to try and do that, you now have to have a lot more infrastructure to start making sure that you're not losing transmission as you go. So ideally, you're on the other side of the property line. 1 mile is fine. When you start to get up to 3 miles, they're starting to find better options. Also, not only are you looking at just the actual transmission loss of what you're generating, you're just, you've got to start figuring in the additional cost. What is the metal cost for those towers? What are you having to pay? Because now not only are you paying the owners of the land that you're siting on, you're having to get genti agreements or right-of-way agreements with the tracts of land that you're crossing. That starts to get, and that typically that starts to get uh, you want to talk about highway robbery. The worst thing that can happen is for the substation is over here. Your tract of land that you now have to generate on is over here. The landowner who's in the middle of that now knows that you are landlocked. If you can't get a transmission line across his property, can charge whatever they want. So these are all actual considerations that a good developer is going to look at before we ever even talk to you as a landowner.
What is the sort of standard distance that you want to be from a substation? And do you try to acquire land in advance of substation plans, or is that too much of a variable to throw into the mix?
In a perfect world, obviously you'd want to be taking track of that and working with it. But you know, you think about how much right now. Look, this country barely has the electrical infrastructure to do what we're currently doing. And now we are either adding new things to the grid, and we're simultaneously trying to keep up with just general U.S. domestic growth needs, both, just in terms of just growing the economy. And you think about how much our infrastructure, including our electrical infrastructure, is going to have to grow in order to allow all of that. There's going to be a lot of give and take. There's going to be a lot of change as we start to get to where we need to be. You could put a lot of money into putting a project together only to find out that the utility decided for some really good reasons that the substation that used to be right next to you, that proposed substation, could now be a half county away. A really good statistic that I read right at the beginning of this year, in 2020, Christmas of 2020, there were approximately 2,000 tracks in the interconnection queues in the lower 48 states. Okay. So that's all major utilities in all 48 lower states had about 2,000 projects that were somewhere in the interconnection pipeline. This last Christmas, you were at 8,500. Okay. Now, when you realize, because the holy grail here is knowing when and where you can actually plug in, when you can take power from the grid, when you can put power into the grid. And, if you wanted to if you want to retire early, figure that out. Let's just say that. Incredible amounts of money have gone into transmission analysis, utility analysis, infrastructure analysis. The problem is it is a shifting landscape, because every time someone puts a new proposal in, every time someone gets a new place in the queue, every time someone drops their place in the queue, okay, every time a new subdivision is put in, every time a new factory is put in, it's constantly changing. And so it is extremely difficult for a utility to be able to tell you, yes, you can go ahead and build this because we need this 20 years from now. It's very difficult. So, and that kind of gets us into why there's such a long option period, because these are the type of problems that a lot of really intelligent people are trying to sort through as they're deciding whether or not your tract of land is something that can be used for that particular project. And then this honestly is why I reached out to you to have this conversation, because these are the really good conversations that are going on in the background that I think a lot of time landowners aren't aware of, and they're just trying to figure out, like, well, wait a minute, I talked to this person in November, and we had a great conversation, and I'm ready to sign, and here we are in May, and now we're looking at a 5-year option. Why are we here? And again, assuming you have a good actor, okay, and you're not a bad actor, you're not dealing with someone who just wants to try and make a quick buck. Then these are the type of conversations that are going on behind the scenes. One of the things that I try and advocate to all of my clients is be open. Be talking to your landowners more than you have to. Okay. Don't just talk to them once every 3 months. Call them up and tell them, hey, nothing's changed, but here's what we're doing. Here's what we're running into. Develop that relationship, develop that trust. And typically, you're going to be the one they sign with, because I mean, anytime you do anything, communication is the key. Just knowing, good or bad, just knowing is better than not knowing.
So on that note, I'd like to ask you about sort of the option period
Sure.
of why does it take so long? And like, I know you just spoke to that almost to the T. I'm assuming you're probably going to repeat a lot of it, but a little more in depth of there's a lot of conversations going on behind the scenes to try to evaluate properties, and there's several properties in the mix. But typical option period, what is that in terms of years? Because it is years, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's not a couple days, it's not a few months. It is a years long process.
Yes.
What is sort of the things going on behind the scenes that make it take, a good chunk of time?
First, we're going to accept that the option period in Texas is different than the one in Alabama, which is different than the one in California. So, depending on the utility and then the area of the country that you're in, the option period is primarily based on two things. It's based on substantive determinations with the tract of land itself and the interconnection process as governed by the utility. Those are the two main things that are being figured out during the option period. Typically, the ones specific to the tract, I can get all of those done within 1 year. Okay, so they require a 6 to 12 month option. We can get all of those done. The main reason that you're going to have on average a 3 to 5 year, usually closer to 5 year option period, you may not need to exercise all, they're going to be, and it's not a 5 year option period, it's 5 1 year option periods. And so sometimes those later option periods are not exercised. You'll either drop the project or go right into the construction phase. Nobody wants to be in the option period. Okay. You don't get any credit from your banks, your investors, or your board when you got a bunch of projects hovering in the maybe stage. So let's talk about both of those issues in terms of what goes into the tract specific. Okay, I need to be able to run title. I need to know that you are the person and the only person that I should be negotiating with. I need to know if there are separate mineral owners, because minerals are going to be something we're going to have to deal with at later stages of the process. We need to get surveys done. I need to know exactly how much land you own, because I need to do a calculation based on usable and unusable. I need to start looking at local guidelines. Do we have to have set-offs? Do we have to have green barriers? Is this something that's going to run afoul of federal permitting, and it's going to be a massive process just to get the permits that I need? Are there zoning issues that we're going to have to start working on? So these are all tract-specific issues that we look at in those initial couple of years. Again, assuming it's not something that's terminal, then that's something we can get through usually in under a year. Now, let's talk about what the utility is doing. When I ran you through that very global overview of what the utility is doing, and realize also, just to complicate that even more, power can be produced. I've got some projects that we're doing in the middle of the country where we're going to be sending power to Los Angeles. Okay, so sometimes you're not even dumping power into the grid where you're producing it; you're sending it far away. So we can add a lot of layers to this particular onion. But the reason you have the long option period that you have is because the utility is going to have to, unfortunately, necessarily take its time figuring out whether or not your project is something that they can greenlight. Okay. Um, is the necessary infrastructure there? Can they take another 200 megawatts of power given the infrastructure that they have, or do they need to increase it? There are some utilities that are now offering to allow a developer to speed the process up if the developer is willing to take on some of that infrastructure creation on themselves, which that again becomes highway robbery in a way, where how much are you actually now building for the grid versus what you're building for yourself. But it's a way to punch through the grid. As of right now, you're looking at on average 3 to 5 years in order to be given the green light to build what it is that you want to build, unless you're in California, which add another couple, just because it's California, add another couple of years onto that process. What's interesting is, the developers, they tend to travel in packs. And so at any given time, certain utilities, and there are really 13 or 14 main utilities in the country. One of them is really hot, meaning the developers have now started to focus in on that one area. And there's always one that went through first, but now all of a sudden everybody else is now coming in. 3 years ago, you could not have a conversation about renewables outside of ERCOT. Everyone wanted to be in Texas. Everyone wanted to be in ERCOT. 3 years before that, it was PJM, and everyone wanted to talk about Pennsylvania. They wanted to talk about Maryland and Kentucky. Right now, everyone's up in MISO, which is basically Wisconsin and Michigan, Minnesota, and that northern area of the country. Everybody would love to crack CAISO, which is California. But what you have is you have the entire industry kind of shifting as they go. And so every time that shift happens, what you do is you destroy the interconnection queue in that area, because it went from reasonably well-functioning and logical and sane to now having everybody and their grandmother trying to put something in that queue. And what typically happens, I think the oil companies do the same thing, just with the different basins around the country. What typically happens is once you reach just a point of just terminal mass, you'll start to see groups start to find somewhere else to go. So all of this plays, and this is a very, very long-winded way of explaining why the option period, as distasteful as it is to everybody, is absolutely required, because the renewable energy industry is paying pretty close to top dollar. And the only reason I say pretty close is because Amazon and Samsung will come in and blow you out of the water. They are top dollar, but they do very, very, very few projects. So they're basically paying top dollar for this acreage, but they cannot put themselves in a position in year one to commit to buying land at that value if in year 4 the utility is going to say you can't do what you want to do. And so they do have to have some protections for themselves. Trust me, they want these option periods less than the landowner does, if you can imagine that.
I do believe, because you spoke to a lot of the logistics, but the other kind of very high overhead thing to go through here is that the longer the timeline, the higher the risk, because within that timeline, you have changing circumstance, you have changing political environments. I mean, everything from where your power is created to where your water goes. It started to bleed over into politics, to where now it sways with public opinion too.
Mhm.
And instead of just creating the power, then you have that. Then you also have, what are the population densities? What are the patterns of
Yep.
interstate, where you have populations moving interstate? Texas could be the hotspot right now, but in 5 years it could be,
Yes.
I've been looking at it from Idaho, right? So like a lot of people moving into Idaho from other states, and the more things change over that time period, then that causes more risk to the project, is what I'm assuming.
And it's at a point in the project when they don't want the risk, because in that year one, during that initial greenfielding period, they have almost no resources and no money in that project whatsoever. So if they have to walk away from it, they can walk away from this for we're talking less than 5 digits. Okay. They have almost nothing in this. All right. And so there's endless possibilities, but at the moment there's very, very little risk. By the time that you're in year 4 or 5 of an interconnection process and an option period, you have now started to put significant corporate resources behind this project. Okay, because not only have you done the surveys and the high resolution maps, not only have you paid for the design layouts and engineered this thing and paid all of your consultants, the attorneys, the accountants, not only have, you spent countless internal resource hours in figuring out what this is going to look like, making sure that the local authorities are happy, doing everything you have to do to get to that stage, plus all the money that goes into just getting through and surviving the interconnection queue. Okay, to lose a project then can be nearly terminal. And so typically the most difficult projects I have are when someone calls me up and it's 5 months to the bulldozers being there and they have a problem. 5-6 months until the bulldozers. And there's very little stress in the initial greenfielding, because you're actually expecting, when you look at how we go about our job, greenfielding is what we call phase 1 of an acquisition. Phase 1 would be the greenfielding. Phase 2 is the actual acquiring the tract of land. Phase 3 is everything you do after the acquisition. Phase 1, we're actually set up to kill a project. We're trying to kill that as quickly as we possibly can. By the time you get into phase 2 and phase 3, though, significant amounts of money have been put in by everybody. And to walk away at that point is actually very difficult. And it's only recently that companies are starting to get more sophisticated acquisition and divestiture programs, where they're able to start flipping these partial projects and start to recover potential outlays. Because, 5 years ago, they really didn't have that forum that was there to allow them to recover some of this, and there was a lot of stress by the time you got to year 4 and 5. So again, it's not just the landowners that hate these option periods. You're starting to look at significant burdens on the company by year 4 and 5.
Got a more specific question for you on the option period as far as how things are handled logistically. When a piece of land is optioned, and this is one that I had some communication with Wayne here in Texas, and again, that's Wayne Dunson, talking about if a property is optioned, for example, for solar, do they come to the table with the investment already there, or do they option the land first and then go seeking investors? And is that a common practice, or is that something to avoid, or sort of what's the logistics there?
Favorite 2 words from law school. It depends. It's across the board. Okay. And to be honest, that's a fantastic question that a landowner should be asking up front. Okay. Is it possible to go out and do this on a wing, a prayer, and an idea? Yes, it is. Okay. And then you can start cobbling things together, and then you'll have a sellable package. That is absolutely something that's possible. Typically, the groups that we work with, they're either large, multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies that are not having financing problems. They're private equity groups that already have their investors lined up, or they're startups that they came out of one of those two groups and they came out of it with financing. I would not walk up personally. I would not allow myself, my company, or one of my folks to walk up to someone if I didn't think that they had a reasonable ability to actually pay and good on the promises that they were about to make. I don't want that reputation attached to me. Okay. I think when you're going to negotiate for anything, you should be negotiating in good faith. And I think one of the basic tenets of good faith negotiating is you can actually live up to the promises that you're making. Okay. So that's at a basic level. But I'm very fortunate in that the groups that we're able to choose to work with, they don't prove to me that they can pay, but I mean, it's obvious that they can, and they've structured their operations, they've structured their marketing, they've structured their advertising, they've structured their deals where it makes sense. And it would make sense to a landowner seeing this that, okay, you're well financed, you've got the money now. Now, having said that, everything under the sun is currently out there.
It's kind of it's the Wild West.
It is exactly the Wild West. And one of the reasons that my colleague and I, not that we didn't step away from the oil and gas industry. We have wonderful relationships there, and we still, just because of all the minerals that we do, we still work there as well. But it was an industry that's 150 years old, and I'm not saying everything has been figured out. There's certainly plenty of forward-looking research going on in that industry as well. But everybody knows what their job is, and they know the protocols, and they've been worked out over 150 years. Whereas here, 25 years ago, renewables was a boutique industry. Now you're starting to have this rapid influx of money coming in, both federal money and private money. And you have the ability to have a voice and say, hey, you know what? I think it works better this way. Let's try this. And you will actually move the corporate machine to go try that. That was something totally new to us. So either way, it was an interesting side point.
I have a random question. We've been talking about it from the perspective of leasing. How often does this sort of agreement result in a purchase instead of a lease? And what's the rationale behind the two methods, I guess?
More often than not, from what I've seen, the rationale for that choice comes from the landowner. My clients, as long as the price is right, I mean, I think everybody, if the price is right, you get a lot more security owning the tract of land. But it really is going to come down to the landowner themselves and whether or not, what's their situation in life. A lot of America's rural owners right now are aging. Okay. When I look for someone, I'm really not looking for the 30 or 40-year-old farmer. Okay, because they are someone who they are relatively new to the endeavor. They are wanting to build. They are wanting to acquire. They're wanting to increase what they're doing. Whereas, you get to an age around 60 or so, you're starting to figure out, okay, what is this going to look like a generation from now? And, assuming that this is your identity, that you can't imagine, just parking all of this up in an S&P 500 fund and going to buy a condo in Florida, assuming that's not what your reality is, then you honestly probably believe that your family is best served by having a tie to the land going forward generationally. And so quite frequently we're talking leases because the person that you're talking with has a very, very firm belief that he wants his grandchild to be working this land. And where we are now, right now as a country, is we have a problem where I think a lot of the children and the grandchildren of those folks who are starting to get a little older right now necessarily don't want to do that. They're living in suburbia, they're living that life. And this I can be a fantastic way of putting that problem off for a generation or two. You're able to keep the land in the property in the family profitably, and then let it be someone else's problem 2 generations from now. Maybe they sell it as the family piggy bank because that's what land is. I mean, to the typical family, land is your chief asset. It's the piggy bank. And it's very difficult when you're sitting with a rural landowner and you're talking about. And again, there's a major difference here. I want to hit this after I make my point. There's a major difference here between solar and wind, because solar is I'm removing you from the land. I need every square inch of that land you can give me. Wind, I'm just putting a turbine up. You continue your operations, and I'm just an extra revenue stream that you don't have to work for. I'm typically a farmer's best friend when I'm coming in with a wind farm. And you should, as long as they're good agreements, sign those agreements as fast as you can. But from the solar point of view, where I am removing you not only from the land, but from your operations, from your livelihood, from your existence, that's a tough ask. Okay. When not only am I asking you to give up your day to day, this is just who you are and what you do, but to you, this tract of land, it's not just where you stick your feet and stand up. This is your piggy bank. This is your family's nest egg. And so many of these folks that I meet, they're not concerned with themselves. Okay. They're concerned with this was from great grandpa. This was from grandpa. And they didn't sell it. They worked it. They kept that value going forward. And the reason these folks have had a life and an existence that they're happy with, hopefully, is because of that trail. And they feel an obligation to push this down another generation or two. So that's why I think leasing is such a popular option. But we do have plenty of folks who they're done. They know the family is out. And they are just selling, they are cashing in, and they are going to Naples, Florida.
So, you brought up a couple things there. It was the generational side of it and the length of contract. What does happen when you get to the end of the agreement? Is the company responsible for complete removal and mitigation of any impact from the power generation, or does it roll over into a new contract and new things? What's that end of contract period look like?
This is where I'm going to say something that may sound as though I'm speaking against self-interest as someone who represents a developer, because you want to walk, theoretically, you want to walk away with the best deal you can for the person you represent. But at the end of the day, I don't honestly think that's the best way to get a deal. I think you get the best deal when everyone is treated fairly. And so my advice here, both to the developers and also to the landowners, is negotiate that now. Because if you don't negotiate that into the agreement now, you're going to fall back on whatever state regulations there are, and you have no control over those. You have no control as those change. So my suggestion is ask for, because if this is going to go back into your family, you ask for reasonable reversion and reclamation provisions. Okay. Because in some states, the only requirement on the part of the developers, they have to remove the panels and remove whatever's in the ground up to 1 foot beneath the ground. 1 foot beneath the ground is not plow depth. Okay. So demand that whatever's in the ground come up out of the ground, so that 2 generations from now, you're not leaving someone with thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of pulling up little bits of rusted steel. Companies right now, from what I can tell anyway, if your requests are reasonable in terms of what we're talking about, you're not asking for much cost-wise, especially when you realize from a present value of money issue, you're talking about something that's going to be 60 years from now. Okay. What I think, I don't think any reasonable company has a problem with leaving the land the way they found it. It's not something a good company is going to fight over.
So that's a good way to vet who you work with, and from the landowner perspective, is like, how willing are they to work with you on the exit plan? That probably tells you a lot about them.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and we always, and again, look, everyone has to start somewhere. So there's nothing wrong with a startup. Okay. Because I mean, ExxonMobil was a startup once, NextEra was a startup once. Everyone was a startup at some point. So you can't ding someone for being a startup now, but you can see how they behave. So I just wanted to give that disclaimer first. And then for anyone who's not a startup, look at what they've already done. Okay. Have they operated over there in a way that you want them to operate here? And if the answer is yes, fantastic. That's a feather in their cap. And the reason that I say that is because, I know that when a potential client meets me, they are interviewing me. Okay. Am I someone they want to work with? But it goes the other way as well. I'm also looking at them are you someone I want to have my name, effort, and reputation tied to? Okay. And so I do look at, hey, how are you operating already? Are you doing good for the community? Are you doing good for your landowners? Are you doing good for yourself? In other words, you're a good going concern that can go forward, because those are the projects that have the best chance of success.
It's the other one. You are who your resume says you are.
Yeah. You're not going to change for this new project after the 10 that you've done. So you can typically know who somebody is. And you absolutely, as a landowner, have a right to say, hey, I want to know who I'm working with. Is this a front company? Is this a real company? I want some answers. And if you don't get that, run away.
So when it comes down to land size, how big do you need to be? And why you spoke to thousands of acres, right? And not everybody owns thousands of acres, but like what's the reason that so many acres are needed?
Okay. Here's where the three types of projects are different. You've got battery, you've got solar, you've got wind. So for standalone solar, meaning you're not putting this into a project that's you're currently building, it's a new solar site. You're looking at somewhere between 1 acre and maybe 30 acres at the most, and that depending on how many megawatts of storage you're going to have in there. Those aren't big asks. The problem is they just have to be located right near a substation. But again, between 1 and 30 acres, depending on how large a package you're going to put in. Now, for solar, on average, it's about 1 megawatt per 7 acres. Okay, that's about what they can generate off of 7 acres. When you realize that a utility scale project is typically going to be 100, 200, or 300 acres, you just start doing the math, okay, of how much acreage you need. Now, realize that's generating acreage, okay? You're also going to have on top of that, you need access roads, you need collector lines, you need the inverters. You potentially, depending on the regulations of where you're doing this, you may need to have green set-asides. There may be many reasons that add to the amount of acreage that you need. So that is the minimum acreage that you need as usable acreage to your project. Throw in that in any area of the country, there's going to be a standard ratio of usable to non-usable acreage on your tract of land. You're hoping for as high a ratio as possible so that you can use as much of that as you possibly can. But when you do the math, realize that you're looking at a minimum. So if you need 7 acres per megawatt, 100 megawatts is going to be 700 acres. If you're going to do a 300 megawatt utility scale storage, that's 2,100 acres. You start throwing in on top of that, all the other ancillary stuff that you need in order to have that project go forward. You're looking at possibly over 3,000 acres. Okay, no. Very, very rarely, unless you're in the Intermountain West, are you going to have someone who can cut 3,000 acres off and give it to you. So what you're doing is you're starting to play a game as a developer of where can I find enough people to put together the amount of acreage that I need. And with solar, again, it's more difficult because you're going to use every acre of that you possibly can. Wind, on the other hand, they need more acreage because you need to have a certain set aside between turbines because each turbine produces wake turbulence, and you don't want the wake turbulence, the same way that you don't want a shadow of one panel influencing the next panel, you don't want the wake turbulence of one wind turbine influencing the one next to it because you just degrade the efficiency of the surrounding turbines. So you need about 70 acres roughly per one wind turbine. Okay. Realize that those turbines, onshore turbines, will produce anywhere between 1 and 3 megawatts. Okay, and you start doing the math and you see why wind farms typically go very well in rural Iowa, the panhandle of Texas. It's not just because of the wind requirements through that channel of the country, if that's where you have large acreage tracts. The good thing about wind, though, is by the time that you're all said and done, you need somewhere between a quarter acre and an acre, because all you need to have is the footing of that turbine and the turbine itself, and then maybe an access road to allow a pickup truck to get in there every once in a while. But the farming or ranching operations can continue to exist around that forevermore. They're wonderful revenue streams.
Gotcha. And so with that, is there an incentive towards one or the other? Do you see some kind of like pricing structures that try to push one over the other? So like, marking solar up to try to get wind there, or I don't know, like, do you see any kind of monkeying around with any of that kind of stuff? Or is there a preference from developers, regarding on the area?
You know, I don't have any I can't point to anything and say, you know, because you made the joke in one of your last podcasts, I'm sure there's a senator somewhere who, you know, has a new boat or something because they signed off on something. I can't say that. Now, look, it's the world. Money makes the world go round. I'm big enough to know that. I will say this: there are very few things in this country harder to put in outside of maybe a nuclear power plant with all the permitting that goes along with that. There are very few things to do that are harder than a wind farm because of how big it is. And in order to make it economically viable, it has to be that big. And so therefore it does need to have backing behind it that helps propel it forward. Otherwise, you would not have anything bigger than an 1850 style windmill, running a pump. These are extremely expensive projects that really only the biggest companies can do. And so, yes, I'm sure they have very sophisticated lobbying groups that make sure that they have, a road to run and an ability to do what they want to do. But some of that discussion goes down the chicken and the egg route. I mean, do they have that lobbying and do they have those assurances because they're big, or are those there because they're big and they're necessary? It's a kind of a cyclical argument. I don't know exactly where I come out on that one, but in terms of my hope, I'm not gonna speak on something that I don't have actual evidence on, but my hope is this: if you look at the forecast U.S. gross domestic product over the next 25 years, we are hoping that we continue to go up at an average rate of 2 to 4% each year through 2050. So if you look at the curve, it's going up, 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 up. Every single American can agree that it's probably better for us to continue to advance our GDP than to allow it to go down. And it has always been the case, really, in the I think the history of recorded thought, that as you start to increase the GDP, you need to have the energy needs to meet the society and the economy that are pushing that GDP. So my point of view is we need every single molecule and every single electron of power that we can have as a country, especially if it's in our own borders, just for security reasons. So I would like to think that a reasonably laid out utility scale solar farm will have the same backing at a local, state, and federal level that a wind farm would, because they're both producing something that we need. Now, we made the joke that it's the Wild West, and so that messes things up a little bit. I think, and while I'm not typically in life a fan of more regulation, this is an area that doesn't have as much regulation as other areas. So there are some changes that are coming to the grid interconnection process. The Senate and the House of Representatives are in the process of trying to streamline some of the federal requirements on those transmission lines to ease some of those burdens. So I think that there are things that we can do as a country to help this issue. But again, I'd like to think that power is not going to be what holds us back as a country over the next 50 years.
So you spoke to regulation. What about incentive? Is there a tiered sort of phase out on federal incentives for solar and wind projects, and how do you see that affecting the industry?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. That really is, and I'm of two minds on that. On the one side, no one likes to see subsidies. The investment tax credits and the production tax credits. No one likes to see there being less money going into a project than there was before. So on the one side, you have a little bit of a knot in your stomach every time these things have to get through Congress and be re-upped. But on the other side of that, every industry has a nascent stage. Every industry has its beginning stage, and that's where they need help, just like an infant. But at a certain point, we expect every person to be able to start to walk on their own. Okay. And I think we're at a point now where the good companies, the well-run companies, the well-financed companies, as much as they like and want and will continue to love having federal subsidies, I think they also realize somewhere deep down that a lot of the competition that they face would not be there but for those subsidies. And that in a not a non-subsidized world, but maybe in a less subsidized world, they might be the ones that continues to stand where a lot of others fall. And I mean, when you're looking at an interconnection queue that has 8,500 projects waiting approval, okay, if you could start to reduce that number by getting some of the not bad actors out, but some of the less, I don't want to say less competent, but less able actors out, the good actors all of a sudden rise to the surface artificially. And so when you start talking about subsidization, I'm of two minds. It absolutely has a place because this industry is not on its own yet. It's not able to. I think it would be difficult for it to compete totally on its own, but at the same time, it is slowly marching toward a point where it doesn't need as much subsidization. But then also realize, we like to say that we're a free market economy in this country, but there are very few industries that do not have some sort of subsidization, even if it is just in the form of a tax break. Okay. I mean, the oil and gas industry absolutely loves to try whole exemptions. So,
well, as you brought up the parenting scenario, I think that's really hyper relevant to the topic, right? Where you have to decide, you have to protect the child, but you have to call that line where you're the enabler and you're raising the brat. Like it's which one is it? Like you got to make sure that they can stand and do all the things on their own, but you can't be an enabler and enable the bad behavior. Is kind of yeah.
As the father of a 9-year-old, you're talking about my daily existence. So,
right. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, no, same here.
No, you're spot on correct. Okay. Because I personally believe that this country needs to have a secure power supply, both in terms of fossil fuels and also in terms of renewables. Okay. I think we need both. I think the mix is something that will really do this country well. But at the same time, I think that we need to be creating the strongest companies possible because that's where you're going to get your best decisions made.
So I want to talk about, and you had a note in the information that you sent over, and I thought that this was a good one. Again, I was just kind of checking the clock too. I don't want to like hold you here all day, but I want to close out with a few questions. The whole issue of solar and wind power, and I brought up politics earlier, and it's a thing, right? There's a lot of pushback on solar from we'll call it identity politics. I don't know what it just like different sources of energy get different responses in a politically charged environment. And so I'm not going to split hairs there, but what kind of headwinds do you face in terms of that sort of environment? And maybe just talk about some of the benefits or pros and cons really of what a development like this brings into a rural area, or how it affects just in general, when a project comes in.
Sure. First, in terms of identity politics, one of the great things about the job that I have is every once in a while frequently I get to get on a plane and go to parts of this country that I never would have seen otherwise. And you see some really, really interesting things. My colleague and I, we were traveling between Lexington, Kentucky, and Cincinnati, Ohio. And rather than take the highway, we took just a very rural route we were scouting some potential areas, and we just wanted to see what was out there. And it was really eye-opening, where that part of the country has a lot of ups and downs, hollers and valleys, and you'd go from one valley to the next, and it was entirely different. You'd go into one valley where, as soon as you went in, you started to see anti-solar signs, anti-wind signs that started to get nasty. You knock, I shoot, and just some nasty billboards on the side of the road. And we were taking pictures of these as we were driving, and then realized that we were starting to increase the acceleration just to get out of there. But it was weird where that entire valley was just that group had decided not for us. You then cross into the next valley, and you'd all of a sudden see, hey, come talk to us, come attend a community meeting. We want to find a way to situate this in our valley, and it a lot of times there were different political ideologies between the valleys. Um, it does seem quite often as a nation that we find an area that we're intellectually or emotionally happy or comfortable with, and then we kind of group together. So, hold 1 second. My apologies. I have to cough. Um, Sorry, my mom raised someone polite, but so what you're talking about absolutely exists out there. And one of the things that we do screen for is, are we in an area that will permit this? And I don't mean like permit from a federal permitting point of view, or
But
I mean,
culturally,
yes, exactly. Will they accept this, or is this thing just going to be a fight? Because I've seen companies have a damn the torpedoes approach, and it's like, no, we're going to put it in there. We found a landowner who'll sell to us. We don't care if 99% of the other landowners want no part of this. And I have watched landowners band together and destroy these projects. I'm not talking about physically or violently. I just mean like they will go to the board of supervisors. They will go to the taxing entity. They will go to the zoning entity. They will start press and marketing campaigns against you. And there's no shortage on both of these sides of national groups that will come in and help you in one of these efforts. And so it's very, very important that you figure out where you're citing this and that there's community buy-in. And look, there are some areas you're never going to have. And then there are other areas that I think if you work it the right way, you will, and I consider you to be a reasonable, competent, and trustworthy operative, you will get in there. To answer your question, though, in terms of what does a community get, I think that is a phenomenal question that is going to be different each and every time based on the landowners you're working with, the board of supervisors you're working with, the zoning board you're working with. A good developer talks to these entities first. Okay. I don't want to go somewhere where I'm not wanted. Okay. I don't just knock on the door of your house and say, I'm here for dinner. Okay. I get invited more often than not. And because we have the luxury of being able to go 2 miles down the road or half a county away, I'd rather be where I'm wanted. Okay. And so typically some of the first things that we do, we start taking the temperature, testing the waters to make sure that our activity and what we're doing is something that's wanted. And a smart group of people on the receiving end of that, not that it becomes a quid pro quo, and certainly not that it becomes a bribery issue. I don't mean that at all, but you start negotiating. Well, hey, this is what the community needs, or this is what, this is where I think you can help, or this is, I don't want trucks rumbling next to an elementary school every day. Okay. I don't want dust thrown up, next to a hospital or a nursing home. This is a rabbit hole I would take a while to get down, so I don't want to go too far down this, but when you look at wind projects, there can be very fair payout schemes, not just for the person with the turbine on their land, but the adjacent landowners, the people who have roads on their neighborhood, maybe even the community in general, where they realize that when you're talking about an endeavor this large, this isn't just one person who should benefit. Many people should benefit. And this is where reasonable minds should come to the table and negotiate. Okay. Ask questions and keep a calm head about yourself, because more often than not, when this actually goes to construction and goes to generation, you're talking about a significant amount of money, and it's something that communities, I think, can really, really benefit from. And the good developers know that, and the good developers operate that way.
So from the landowner's perspective, what's their best route to working with a developer, working with you on, from beginning to end? Like, and let's take it from kind of before they get in the process, because once you're in, you're in, and like you're kind of like you're out of the chute, right? Like, the whatever happens next is sort of out of your hands. But as far as getting the preparation ready and getting the right stable of information together and kind of making sure that all their stuff is in a row, what's kind of the best things that a landowner can do in preparation? I guess that's what I'm looking for. I was meandering there, but I got to preparation.
Really realize that more than 95% of the time, I'm going to find you. You're not going to find me. Because like I said, I've got the sophisticated modeling, I've got the programs, I've got the GIS algorithms, I got all that. Okay. We're going to find the areas that work best for the developers. And the developers honestly know where they want to be as well. So is it unheard of that a landowner will come unsolicited and present a package? Yes. And you know what? Sometimes those actually do work well. Now you have to realize all the limitations we've talked about in this conversation, where you by yourself might not be a project. And if you by yourself are not a project, then it may not be worth the developer's time to try and start a project there. You may be 15 miles away from the nearest point of interconnection. There's a lot of reasons why, an unsolicited approach may not work. But my suggestion to most people would be 95% of the time, we're going to find you. The developers and I are going to find you. When and if we contact you, have an open and fair conversation. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. That's fine. That's great. You know what? I like nothing more than when I meet a competent individual who's doing what they're doing it well, and they're liking what they do. I like knowing that I live in a country of happy people to some extent. Okay. It makes me comfortable with where I live. So if this is not for you, it's not for you. I'm perfectly fine with that. But for a lot of folks, whether it's an additional revenue stream, whether this is a way to perpetuate the ownership through a generation or two, or whether this is your retirement package, okay, for a lot of people, this can be a really interesting potential solution to issues they're currently dealing with. And so my suggestion is always, when you meet the person I send out or myself, depending on how things are going, have an honest conversation. Represent yourself truthfully the same way you want me to represent myself truthfully to you. I find that most landowners know exactly what a tract of land is worth. And I don't mean the market value of the tract of land. I mean what that tract of land is worth to you. Okay. The county or the community at large may tell you that this tract of land is worth $100,000, but you know what? You put your laydown yard, you put your truck yard, you put your pumping station on there. So all of a sudden, this is much more valuable to you. So if this is something you want to talk about, have that open conversation. The best ones of these I've had have been with ranch managers or farmers who they'll sit there and they'll say, okay, you know what? I cannot give you this tract of land, but over here, I have 60 acres. Does this work for you? And they start to negotiate back and forth. And we try and see if it works. And so really, I don't have a bright line panacea for you where I can tell you, okay, you know what, do A, B, and C, and this is going to work perfectly. I can just give you the basic Boy Scout, hey, treat others the way you want to be treated. And if there's a deal to be had, we're going to find it. It's recognize the fact that it's a long process. It's not open and shut. This is not something where we do not ever go to somebody with a document in hand and say, hey, sign this, ever. We talk for a while, and then it's usually only after a couple of weeks that we say, hey, would you like to see some of this memorialized in a document and look at it? By which point, if I've done my job right, it's just a memorialization of everything that we've talked about. So know what you want, know what you don't want, be prepared for a process, okay? Understand the restrictions that I'm operating under, ask questions, okay? Because if the person on my end of the phone or the pickup truck is good, we're going to answer all your questions until we're blue in the face and you're out of questions, okay? So just be a part of the process. That's the starting point. And then where you go from there, it's just typical negotiating, find a way to get both parties to something that's palatable.
So, one, thank you, because I think that's all really great advice. Two, I have kept you here way past the time what we had budgeted. And so I can't thank you enough. The information that you've gone over here is it's phenomenal, honestly. But I want to give you a chance for any kind of closing thoughts, as we exit here, besides all of the thanks that I have.
Well, two. First, I want to thank you. This was a blind reach out on my part where after I had listened to your podcast, which I think is great, I wanted to interact in the process, and you allowed me to do that. And it really says a lot about you that you're willing to take someone who just raises his hand on a Friday afternoon a couple of months ago and says, hey, I'd love to be a part of this. And so I really, really appreciate someone such as yourself doing this. So you have my thanks as well. But I guess the last thing that I would say, and I've said this before, and so, I think if nothing else, I hopefully get some points for consistency of message. The great thing about the job that I have is we live in a time when I think people like to turn everyone against one another, and we all have our own little camps. The great thing about this job is I've now been to 45 of the 50 states, and by and large, I'm really impressed by the people that I meet. I'm really impressed by the level-headedness, the politeness, the clear-headedness, and the reasonableness of so many people that I've met. And the same way that I try and reciprocate by being the same way when I talk to people, it lets me sleep better at night knowing that those folks are still out there, and it's just not the people who get the microphone that exist. So that's I think my parting statement. But again, thank you. This is very much appreciated on my part.
Yeah, likewise. And man, if we get a chance to do it again, I think it'd be awesome.
I'm always available. I really appreciate it.
Awesome, man. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
This concludes episode number 96 for the National Land Realty podcast, discussing solar land development from the perspective of the developers with Vincent Caruso, Managing Director of Percheron, LLC. You can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com. And wait, don't shut off the player just yet. Don't stop driving and keep the volume up. Coming up in a few weeks, we are going to have our 100th episode of the National Land Realty podcast. This is going to be fun. Our 100th episode is going to be 100% live, and I'm inviting back a slew of guests to, how can we say it? We're going to sit back and tell some lies. No, we're just going to tell some good stories. And it's going to be a great, fun episode. Do not miss it. Stay tuned. We'll be announcing this shortly. Thank you, and have a good day. I'm headed into the weekend. Have a great weekend. And since you're listening at any time that you download this, whatever you're doing today, whether it's a weekend or a weekday, have a great one. Thank you.